Kristoffer talking about stuff. Origin Effects, known for making some of the best compressor pedals in the world, the Kali 76 series. They took the world by storm a few years back when they launched this monster. The Revival Drive amp in a box. This one emulates some of the most iconic classic guitar amps ever made. And when Origin Effects announced that they were going to make not only one but two emulating pedals for bass guitar, I got very excited. And here they are, the blue Super Vintage, which is focusing on the classic Ampeg SVT, and the black 64 black panel, which is focusing on the Fender Bassman and Showman and Tweed. The Super Vintage pedal has been built very carefully to give you exactly that classic Ampeg SVT sound that we all know, including all the possibilities to tweak it just the way you want it. And I must say, I'm an Ampeg man. I grew up with Ampeg, and Ampeg's been a big part of my sound in the past. And ever since we've turned more and more into in-ear monitors on stage with no big stacks behind us, I've been looking for that sound, for something to give me that, that clarity, that the typical Ampeg sound for live. And I've tried out numerous different manufacturers who all claim to give you that sound, but I never really heard it, at least not the way I remembered it, And when I plugged this one in, I got a big smile on my face. It just felt like home. I was there. It just felt so familiar. This was the Ampeg sound that I knew. And, it has that clarity, the definition, the punch to it. And they have this wonderful drive that you can go from that clear sound to a little bit more pushed sound, to an overdriven sound, all the way up to overdrive that we know from the bands and players who pushed things to the limit and experimented back in the days. They were afraid the amp would blow up. You don't have to be afraid of that. You can just smack it all the way up and it will deliver. So this is a really, really good Ampeg emulating pedal. Amp in a box, definitely. The 64 black panel. Now I must confess I do not know all the Fender amps in detail that this pedal is supposed to emulate, but I do know this, it really does sound like a Fender amp. It's big, it's warm, it demands its place, if you understand what I mean. It's very dynamic, it's organic, it's everything, and it really does sound like an amp. It doesn't sound like a preamp, doesn't sound like an equalizer or something that's supposed to make your bass sound better. This sounds like a Fender amp. One thing I really like about this is the gain or the drive. You can really push it out without losing the bottom end. It's just going to grow like the monster that it is. So awesome. The layouts of the pedals are quite similar. They both have an input gain or drive, which will take your sound from clean all the way up to distortion. And if it's too distorted or too muddy, you can blend in your direct signal with the blend knob to clear things up a bit. And then of course the output volume. They both have a 3-band equalizer, and on the Super Vintage you can switch the mid-range frequencies between 220 Hz, 800 Hz and 3 kHz with a little toggle switch. The black panel on the other hand has a fixed mid-range frequency. The Super Vintage also has a toggle switch for ultra high and low cut. Of course you can keep it in the middle for the neutral sound. On the black panel you can switch between the Tweed sound and the blackface sound with a toggle switch on the left. With a toggle switch on your right, you can add bright cap or push it down for some extra fat lows. Both pedals come with cabinet simulators. On the Super Vintage, of course, the classic Ampeg 8x10 inch, and on the black panel, the rumbling 2x15 inch. An interesting feature with the cabinet simulator is that you can set it to be on only when the pedal is activated, or even when the pedal is deactivated, turning it into a DI box with the cabinet simulator. So you can turn the preamp off and then have anything else run through that speaker. So you can, for instance, have the black panel, the Fender sound, go into the Super Vintage and use the 8x10 speaker simulator, or the other way around. If you want to run these pedals through another preamp or rig, there are some knobs at the bottom that will help you compensate for the characteristics of those amps, making sure that these pedals will give you that Fender and Ampeg sound. And if you're using a speaker cabinet with a horn or tweeter, the horn cut toggle switch will help you protect them by cutting out some frequencies so you won't overload them and blow them up. And of course, for the DI, the ground lift switch. But enough of me talking, let's hear them out. So, starting off with the Super Vintage, it's the blue Ampeg pedal, and this is my bass sound going straight in without the pedal. I'm using my Mayonnaise Jabba 422 PJ. It's in passive mode, the treble is turned on maximum, and I'm using both pickups at the same time. As I mentioned earlier, you can have the cabinet simulator set so that it's turned off when the pedal is turned off, or that it's constantly on. So you will have even this now is completely bypassed. Or you have with the cabinet simulator. Now the only comment that I have on these pedals is that you cannot turn the cab simulator off if you're using the DI XLR output. So if you want to bypass the cab simulator, you have to use the amp output, and that kind of disables you to use the pedal as a DI. Now, turning this baby on. Now, as I mentioned before, the input gain or the drive, you can keep it at a fairly clean sound. What I like about Ampeg, and which this pedal also has, is that if you just push it a little bit, you get that pushed sound, kind of like with, you know, the amp is kind of pulling the sound out of your bass and just shoving it into your face, like, here you are, you wanted that sound, here it is. Love that, love that. And of course, as I said, you can turn it up gradually to where it starts to crack. You have to turn down the output before that. Kind of looking for the edge on that one, or all the way up. You're going to move towards overdrive. Or not, push it all the way up. Let's go, boys. Now, if you think that this becomes a little bit muddy, that's when you use the blend button, for instance. So all the way to the left is your original sound. I turn the output down. So turn that back up. And then you just blend in that distortion. The way you like it, to your taste. So going back to the clean sound and full on amp, let's take a listen to the Equalizer. So the low end, the bass, rolling it off. Back to zero. And going up. As you hear, it's not pushing it too much. It's still very melodic. I mean, it's rumbling. It's you know, it's very warm, very soft down there, but still very organic, still very dynamic. It doesn't push it to the limit. It doesn't go overboard, and really like that. Mid-range, as I said, it's switchable mid-range on the Super Vintage. So we're going to start with a 220 Hertz, which is pretty low. So taking it off. Back to 0. And turning it up. Now this is not my favorite frequency, at least not to have in there. So I would probably, if I'm going to use the mid-range on this frequency, it would probably be to roll it off just a little bit, add a little bass, and roll off the 220. Get a little bit more definition in the lows, but it's a personal choice, isn't it? Yes, going up to 800 Hertz. Now this is where a lot of definition in the bass sound lies. So rolling it off. Back to 0. And going up. Also maybe not the most beautiful frequency on bass, but I know bass players who swear on this frequency and they roll everything up and they just go for the 800 Hertz. This is definitely, if you want, looking for that vintage sound, and especially, you know, I'm going to switch over to the bridge pickup, the jazz pickup. I'm going to turn this one down a little bit because it's pretty heavy. Or the precision. So, definitely an interesting frequency to work with. 3 kilohertz, that's quite high for bass guitars. There's a lot of presence in your sound. Turning it down. Up to 0. And boosting it. Now there's a lot of fret hiss going on that frequency, so this is a nice way to kind of smoothen that out a bit. And then the highs. Yes, down with the highs. Back to 0. And boosting it. And then we go to the right switch up here, the ultra high up. So the ultra high. And going down you have the low cut. So cutting off some low end. So that was pretty much the basics of the Super Vintage. Moving on. And over to the 64 black panel. Again, this is my direct bass guitar sound. And again, you can set the cabinet simulator to where it's on only when the pedal is activated, or that is constantly on also in the bypass mode, so that you'll have a DI box with a cabinet on there. And this one has the two 15-inch cabinet. This is how it sounds. So let's turn it on, shall we? The pedal is now set to the switch down, which is the black face. That's the Showman, Bassman modus, and later on we'll flick it over to the Tweed mode as well. As you see, the same kind of layout. So we got drive, blend, output, an equalizer, and the two switches over here. So let's go for the clean sound right now. And again, you can turn it up to where it's kind of cracking. Turn out the output as well. Moving up further to overdrive. And as you notice, there's still that low, warm bottom going on all the time. And all the way up to drive, turn down the output volume a little bit more. And if this gets too muddy, again, go with the blend. So this is 100% in the guitar signal going on. And then blend in the pedal. So put everything back to clean, and we're gonna see how the equalizer sounds. Lows, turning it off. Back to 0. And boosting it. So very warm, very fuzzy, very nice. Mid-range has a fixed frequency. Back to 0. And boosting it up. And as you might notice, the black pedal compared to the super vintage, the equalizer is a lot more subtle, which is compared, to the Fender, which is, the way it's supposed to be. Where Fender kind of said, like, this is the sound. You might tweak a little bit, but not too much. So these settings are quite, subtle. Highs, taking it down. Back to 0. And boosting it. Now on this you have a bright cap. Without it. And a fat one. Without it. And of course the Tweed switch of the Tweed, which is a bit more mid-rangey kind of sound. this will pop out definitely if you start pushing it, going towards overdrive or even distortion. You'll definitely hear the tweed kind of stick out. Just wonderful. All that lows are still in there, just smacking it to you. Wonderful pedal, definitely wonderful. And as always with Origin Effects, all their products are built like tanks, made to take on the road, to use, to step on. Only top-notch components in everything, and yeah, very well executed. Thank you very much for watching. Until the next time, rock on.